The storm struck Arizona territory like divine retribution, each raindrop exploding against the crimson earth in tiny bursts of dust and memory. Atsadi pressed his spine against the rough willow bark, dark eyes scanning the creek that bore the town's name, Willow Springs. Here upstream from Conrad Pike's silver mine, the water still ran pure. Downstream, where Pike's operation had been dumping waste for 2 years, the poisoned flow had already claimed 2 Apache children and left others with a wasting sickness that no medicine could cure. At 30, Atsadi bore scars, both visible and hidden. The puckered flesh across his ribs pulled tight as he shifted, a permanent reminder of the day Pike's guards had opened fire on peaceful protesters. The day his younger brother Shila had died with a bullet in his chest, 25 years of life ending in the dirt of a white man's street. Lightning split the sky as Atsadi checked his weapons. The bone-handled knife had belonged to his grandfather, worn smooth by 3 generations of Apache hands. The Springfield rifle was older, still temperamental, but reliable when properly maintained. His duty tonight was clear guard, the creek that fed his people's gardens, watch for Pike's men, who might try to expand their poisoning under cover of darkness. The sound of splashing water made every muscle freeze. Through the curtain of rain and swaying willow branches, he glimpsed her, a woman standing waist-deep in the creek, working desperately to wash mud from her torn clothing. Even in the uncertain light, exhaustion marked every line of her body movements, slow and careful, like someone who had been running for days. She turned, and lightning illuminated her face with harsh clarity. Recognition struck like a physical blow. Those features, the determined jawline eyes, holding more intelligence than fear, matched the crude sketches on wanted posters outside Morrison's general store. Leonora Ward, $50 reward for theft of company property. But before Atsadi could decide whether to retreat or confront this fugitive, the night exploded with approaching hoofbeats. 3 riders materialized from the storm like avenging spirits, their horses sending up sprays of muddy water as they charged toward the creek. There she is. The lead rider's voice carried a thick European accent. Klaus circle left, Harry, stay with me. Rifle fire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing through the rain like deadly lightning. The woman screamed and dropped beneath the surface as bullets sparked off creek stones around her. Atsadi moved without conscious thought, lunging forward to grab her wrist as she surfaced, gasping. Stay low, he commanded, pulling her behind his black mare as more shots rang out. The animal reared in terror while Leonora pressed against Atsadi's chest, her heart hammering through wet fabric. He could feel her trembling from cold and fear. Behind the horse, Atsadi ordered, steadying his rifle across the mare's back. The riders had spread out, trying to catch them in crossfire. One, a red-bearded man with cruel eyes, spurred his mount closer. Atsadi's rifle roared. The heavy bullet took the foreign-accented rider's center mass, toppling him into the creek, with a splash that sent ripples across dark water. Klaus would collect no more bounties. Blast and perdition. Redbeard wheeled around, fury thick in his voice. Harry, we got ourselves an Apache. The third man, lean as a fence post with a hatchet hanging from his belt, raised his weapon. Should have minded your own affairs, Redskin. But Atsadi was already whistling sharp and low for his mare while grabbing Leonora's hand. The trained animal responded instantly, galloping away as bullets whined behind them. They ran through tall prairie grass toward the distant lights of Willow Springs. Leonora's bare feet left bloody prints in the mud, but she never slowed, matching Atsadi's pace with grim determination. Now why? She gasped when they finally stopped beneath a massive cottonwood rising from the flatland like nature's cathedral. Why did you help me? Atsadi studied her face in the intermittent lightning, seeing something that reminded him of his brother's faith in friendship across racial divides. When he answered, his voice carried the weight of personal loss. Because some battles choose their own warriors. The ancient trunk provided shelter from the storm's fury, its roots creating a natural hollow where ground remained dry despite driving rain. Leonora collapsed against the bark chest, heaving feet bleeding from sharp grass. We rest briefly. Atsadi announced, scanning their back trail. Those men will regroup and pursue us. Tell me why Pike wants you dead. Leonora looked up through wet hair clinging to her face like dark silk. You know Conrad Pike. Every soul in this territory knows Pike. Atsadi settled beside her rifle, ready. His mine has been fouling Willow Creek for 2 years. The water that feeds our gardens, our livestock. 2 children from my band died from the sickness it brings. The pain in his voice made Leonora study his weathered features more carefully. Here was a man who had lost more than she initially understood. I worked as his surveyor's clerk. She began wrapping her arms around her knees for warmth. Came west from Massachusetts 6 months ago when the textile mills closed. Pike promised good wages for someone who could read and write properly. Atsadi nodded. He had seen other Eastern refugees in Willow Springs, people fleeing economic collapse for frontier opportunities. The surveyor was Benjamin Clemens, brilliant when sober, which wasn't often. Pike kept pressuring him to redraw boundary maps, moving creek beds on paper to match his illegal diversions. Leonora's voice hardened. I realized he was stealing water rights, wholesale, falsifying territorial documents to increase his mine's legal allocation. And you tried to stop him. I copied pages from his ledger books, maps, financial records, payments to officials. She touched a waterproof bundle inside her dress. Evidence that Pike has been defrauding the territorial government for years. I plan to give it to the federal land agent arriving Friday. 4 days away. Atsadi calculated distances, hiding places, survival odds. Not encouraging, especially with an Eastern woman unaccustomed to rough living. Pike discovered your theft. Sheriff Crowther appeared at my boarding house with those wanted posters. Claimed I stole company property, but what I really took was the truth. Her laugh held no humor. I've been hiding in the hills 3 days, living on creek water and wild berries. Thunder rolled across the prairie like distant artillery. When it faded, Atsadi asked the question troubling him. How do I know you're telling the truth? You could be exactly what those posters claim, a thief spinning tales for sympathy. Leonora met his gaze directly. Because I've seen what Pike's poison does to families. Mrs. Henderson's baby died last month, born too early, too weak to survive. Doc Edwin believes it's connected to the mine's discharge. Atsadi knew about the Henderson tragedy. Doc Edwin was one of the few white men who treated Apache patients, sharing medical knowledge across racial lines. His professional opinion carried weight. My brother died trying to stop Pike, Atsadi said quietly. Shila was 25. Went to the mine last year with elders to protest the poisoning. Pike's guards shot him down like a mad dog. I remember that day, Leonora whispered. I was working in Pike's office when it happened. Your brother wasn't armed, just trying to talk, find peaceful solutions. Atsadi's head snapped toward her. You were there. I saw everything through the office window. That red-bearded man, Rusty Joe, started shooting first. Your brother fell in the street and nobody helped him. Sheriff just stood there cleaning his fingernails. The memory burned fresh. Atsadi had found Shila hours later, carried him home while their mother wailed grief to an uncaring sky. Pike forced me to sign a witness statement afterward. Leonora continued. Said, I saw your brother attack his men first. I refused, but Crowther threatened arrest for interfering with official business. So I signed his lies, but destroyed my copy immediately. A witness. Someone who could testify that Shila had been murdered, not killed defending himself as Pike claimed. Atsadi felt something cold and purposeful settle in his chest. How long to reach the federal agent? 4 days if we avoid Pike's men. He arrives Friday morning on the Tucson stage. 4 days through country crawling with bounty hunters and worse. Atsadi studied her torn dress, bleeding feet barely controlled, shivering. You ever lived outdoors? No. But I've survived 3 days already. Fair point. Atsadi made his decision with the certainty of a man who trusted his instincts above all else. We go north through Echo Canyon. Rain will wash our scent, make tracking nearly impossible. No fires, no talking in open ground. Travel by night, rest during day. He fixed her with a steady look. It will be the hardest 4 days of your life. Still want my help? Yes, Leonora replied without hesitation. Then we begin now. But first, medical attention. From his kit, Atsadi produced a needle and thread. Leonora looked puzzled until he pointed to a bullet graze across his forearm. You mentioned reading and writing. Can you sew? Worked textile mills before coming west. I can sew fast and clean. She took the needle with steady hands, despite everything endured. This will hurt. Pain is just another frontier fact, Atsadi replied. Question is whether it kills you or teaches something useful. As Leonora worked with factory-trained precision, Atsadi watched the eastern horizon for pursuit signs. The men who attacked them would be regrouping, organizing systematic searches. Professional hunters didn't surrender easily, especially with Pike's money motivating persistence. Even before Leonora finished stitching, hoofbeats echoed across the prairie, 2 riders moving with experienced trackers' methodical patterns, Rusty Joe and Harry regrouping after Klaus's death. Blast that Apache, Rusty Joe's voice carried clearly. Klaus was worth 3 ordinary men. Pike ain't gonna appreciate losing him. Harry replied with familiarity, suggesting their employer's violent temperament was well known. Atsadi pressed a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. The riders circled wide, trying to pick up tracks in muddy ground. In this weather, following trails required exceptional skill, but these men possessed it. His mare whinnied softly from where she stood tethered. The innocent sound froze both riders like hunting dogs catching scent. You hear that? Could be wild mustangs. Could be our Apache friend. Atsadi made a swift decision, untying his horse and boosting Leonora onto its back. Her wounded arm made mounting difficult, but she managed without crying out. And when I signal, ride north toward those mountains, he instructed quietly. There's an old trail about a mile out, following a dry wash. Stay on rocky ground when possible. What about you? I'll catch up, now go. But Leonora grabbed his wrist before he could step away. Don't get yourself killed for me. I'm not worth dying over. Atsadi looked up at her, this Eastern woman, who had sewn his wounds without trembling, who carried evidence against one of the territory's most powerful men. Everyone fighting for justice is worth the risk. Hoofbeats grew closer. Atsadi slapped his mare's flank, sending horse and rider galloping into darkness while he melted into shadows beneath the cottonwood. Rusty Joe and Harry thundered past, following fleeing sounds. Atsadi counted to 10, then whistled a low, warbling nighthawk call his trained horse would recognize. But the hunters had sharper ears than credited. They wheeled around, splitting up to converge from 2 directions. Muzzle flashes lit the prairie as they fired blind into darkness around the tree. Atsadi dropped prone, crawling through wet grass to a shallow, water-filled depression. The Springfield felt slick but comforting. One shot, one kill, his grandfather's teaching for fighting overwhelming odds. Harry rode close, rifle sweeping as he searched for targets. Too close. Atsadi rose to one knee and fired the heavy bullet, taking Harry in the shoulder and spinning him from his saddle. Harry's down. Rusty Joe spurred toward the muzzle flash, working his repeating rifle's lever rapidly. Bullets whined overhead, but Atsadi was already moving using terrain and darkness. A soft whinny announced his mare's return 30 yards away. But between him and escape wounded, Harry had reached his rifle and was aiming at Leonora, frozen in her saddle. No time to reload. Atsadi drew his knife and charged. Harry's shot went wide as a Apache warrior crashed into him. They wrestled in mud, fighting for rifle control. Harry was wounded but desperate, using elbows and knees viciously. His axe came free during the struggle. Die, you red devil. The axe whistled past Atsadi's ear, close enough to part hair. He drove an elbow into Harry's wounded shoulder, earning a pain scream, then rolled away as the man swung again. Atsadi caught the axe handle and they wrestled, while Rusty Joe circled on horseback, seeking clear shots. Thunder crashed overhead. In that distraction moment, Atsadi drove his knee into Harry's solar plexus. The man doubled over, and Atsadi's knife found the space between ribs. Harry collapsed face first into a puddle. The hairy Rusty Joe's anguish transformed to murderous rage. "I'll gut you slow for that." But Atsadi was running for his horse, vaulting behind Leonora as rifle fire cracked around them. One bullet grazed their mare's flank, causing her to stumble before recovering. Can you shoot?" he asked, pressing Harry's rifle into her hands. "I can try." They rode hard through rain, Rusty Joe pursuing with deadly intent. His rifle spoke repeatedly bullets, coming uncomfortably close. When Rusty Joe closed to point-blank range and raised his weapon for a killing shot, Leonora pulled the trigger. Her shot went wide, but spooked Joe's horse badly enough to throw off his aim. His return shot sparked off rocks as they tumbled from the saddle, taking cover behind the largest boulder. "I've got you pinned." Rusty Joe dismounted, using his horse for cover while reloading. "Pike's paying good money for that woman, but he never said she had to be breathing." Atsadi checked his rifle, still empty, no time for proper reloading. But Harry's weapon was newer, a lever action holding multiple rounds. He worked the mechanism, ejecting a spent shell. "When I move, you run for that dry wash," he told Leonora. She started protesting, but his expression stopped her. This was not a man accustomed to having tactical decisions questioned. Atsadi rose above their boulder cover, drawing Rusty Joe's fire, then darted to new position. The gunman tracked him with his rifle, concentrating on the visible threat, which meant he never saw Leonora slip away into darkness. By the time Rusty Joe realized his primary quarry had vanished, Atsadi's shot had taken him center mass. The red-bearded hunter toppled backward into mud, his rifle falling silent forever. Prairie fell quiet, except for drumming rain. Atsadi whistled for his mare, then helped Leonora bandage her wounded arm with dress strips. "Two down," she observed, voice steadier than expected. "And how many more hunting us?" Atsadi wondered as they mounted again. Neither wanted to contemplate that question too closely. The old cattle trail wound through broken country, following ridge lines and dry washes that would make tracking nearly impossible in daylight, let alone during storms. Atsadi set steady pace northward, guiding by landmarks visible only to eyes trained from childhood in harsh landscape. The moon had disappeared behind thickening clouds when they approached what appeared to be a small ranch. Smoke rose from a modest farmhouse chimney, and lamplight glowed warm in windows. The Haymaker Ranch, Atsadi identified, showing no inclination to approach. "We'll circle wide." But Leonora recognized something that made her straighten. "That's Hugh Mallory's place. He's a good man, helped me when I first came to town, extended credit when Pike was slow paying wages. We could ask for shelter." "No." Atsadi's refusal was absolute. "Even good men become dangerous when bounty money's involved. We keep moving." They gave the ranch wide berth crossing open ground that left Atsadi feeling exposed despite concealing darkness. Every shadow could hide ambush, every sound might herald approaching enemies. Leonora spotted the figure first, a man stumbling along the creek bank, clutching his midsection, while blood seeped between fingers. Without waiting for Atsadi's permission, she reined in. "Mister, are you injured?" The stranger looked up with pain-glazed eyes. Young, perhaps 25, with calloused hands and sun-darkened skin of outdoor work. Recognition flickered as he focused on Leonora. "You're the ward woman." He gasped between agony waves. "Ronan McBride. I used to work for Pike." Atsadi's hand moved toward his rifle, but the wounded man was clearly no threat. He could barely stand, let alone fight. "What happened?" Leonora asked, sliding down despite Atsadi's disapproving look. "Tried quitting the mine after what happened to them Henderson children." Ronan explained in painful bursts. Pike don't take kindly to workers developing consciences. Had his boys beat me bloody, then gut-shot me for good measure. Even in poor light, Leonora could see the wound was serious. Without proper medical care, this man would be dead by sunrise. Can you ride? Ma'am, I can barely walk. Atsadi dismounted reluctantly, recognizing moral imperative, even as tactical sense screamed warnings. This was exactly the complication that got people killed in dangerous territory. There's more you need knowing, Ronan whispered as they helped him into their saddle. Pike's got ambushes set on the main road to town. Anyone tries reaching that federal land agent. He fumbled inside his blood-stained shirt, producing an oilskin packet. Took this from Pike's office safe before I ran. More evidence, names, dates, bribery records. His voice faded as pain overwhelmed him. But Leonora accepted the packet reverently. Additional proof of Pike's corruption, but at what cost? They couldn't abandon a dying man, yet couldn't carry him indefinitely. Doc Edwin, she said suddenly. Hugh Mallory's boy sometimes carries messages for him. If we can get word. Atsadi considered dwindling options, none offering much hope. But leaving Ronan to die violated principles deeper than tactical considerations. We take him to the ranch, he decided. Quickly, then we disappear before Pike's men come looking. Hugh Mallory proved everything Leonora claimed, a weathered man in his 40s, with kind eyes and work-hardened hands, who asked no questions before helping. He took one look at Ronan's wound and immediately sent his teenage son Tommy riding hard for Doc Edwin's place on town's outskirts. Pike's been stealing my water for 2 years, Hugh explained quietly as his wife Sarah tended the wounded miner. Half my crops died last season because his illegal diversions left me with alkali seepage. I'll hide you as long as necessary. But they couldn't stay long. Even as Doc Edwin arrived with his medical bag, Atsadi scanned the horizon for pursuit signs. Pike would have reinforcements by now, professional gunmen who wouldn't make Klaus and Harry's mistakes. That's a nasty wound, Doc Edwin pronounced after examining Ronan carefully. But he'll survive if we prevent infection and get nourishment into him. The physician was lean with prematurely gray hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog everything observed. Atsadi had heard good things about him from Apache patients who sought his help when traditional medicine proved insufficient. What Atsadi didn't notice, what none of them noticed in the urgency of treating Ronan's wounds, was the way Doc Edwin's fingers lingered just slightly too long on the oilskin packet when Leonora showed him the evidence, or how his questions about their plans seemed perfectly natural in the moment, but would later prove unnaturally specific. Or the expensive gold pocket watch that briefly caught lamplight when he checked Ronan's pulse, a timepiece far beyond a frontier doctor's normal means. Doctor, can you get word to the territorial land agent? Leonora asked urgently. Tell him what's really happening here. I can try, but Laurent won't arrive until Friday, and Pike has informants throughout the territory. Edwin finished bandaging Ronan's wound with professional efficiency. Your best chance remains reaching town safely with that evidence. As dawn approached, they prepared to leave, despite Sarah Mallory's protests about Leonora's untreated injuries. Hugh insisted on providing supplies, jerky hardtack, and a canteen of clean water. His wife pressed a small sewing kit into Leonora's hands. I'm for mending what the trail tears, she said meaningfully. They were mounted and ready when young Tommy came racing back, his face white with alarm. There's men asking questions in town about an Apache and a white woman, offering $20 for information. Atsadi felt familiar cold weight of impending danger. Pike was mobilizing every resource, turning personal vendetta into territory-wide manhunt. How many men, he asked. 8, maybe 10. And Sheriff Crowther's leading them, looking madder than a stepped-on rattlesnake. 10 professional fighters with legal authority behind them. Atsadi calculated odds and distances, finding little cause for optimism. We leave now, he decided, while they're still organizing in town. As they rode away from Haymaker Ranch, Leonora twisted in the saddle to wave farewell to the modest farmhouse where good people had risked safety for strangers. "They'll be safe," Atsadi assured her, reading her worry. "Hugh's no fool, and Doc Edwin has friends throughout the territory." What he couldn't know was that Doc Edwin was already composing a mental message for Pike, detailing exactly where the fugitives were heading and how best to intercept them. The doctor's friends throughout the territory included some very dangerous people indeed. The pine-covered foothills offered blessed concealment as they pushed deeper into mountains along game trails that barely deserved the name. They had been riding hard for hours, switching between rocky ground and creek beds to confuse trackers. Leonora's wounded arm throbbed with each jolt, but she endured without complaint. "We rest here," Atsadi announced, leading them into a small clearing surrounded by thick timber. "No fire, and we sleep in shifts." Leonora slid from the saddle legs, trembling with exhaustion. Adrenaline that had sustained her through night's violence was finally wearing off, leaving her acutely aware of every cut, bruise, and ache accumulated. "How far to town?" she asked, settling against a pine tree. 25 miles, perhaps 30. But we're not approaching directly." Atsadi began caring for his mare, checking hooves and offering water from his hat. "Pike will have main roads watched. We'll circle north, come in through the mining district." As if summoned by their enemy's mention, distant gunfire echoed across the valley below. Multiple rifles firing in coordinated volleys, unmistakable pattern of organized search. "Gilster, they're sweeping the lower country systematically," Atsadi observed grimly. "Professional tactics." Leonora sank deeper against the tree trunk, feeling their situation's full weight. "Maybe I should surrender myself. Face whatever charges Pike fabricates, rather than getting more people killed." "What charges?" Atsadi's laugh held bitter amusement. "Crowther's bought and paid for, and the territorial marshal is 300 miles away. Out here, Pike's word is law." Gunfire continued sporadically as they took turns sleeping. When Leonora woke from brief rest, sun stood high overhead, and Atsadi was studying something through trees with obvious concern. "Riders," he reported quietly. "5 of them moving slowly. They've lost our trail, but no general direction." Leonora crept forward to peer through undergrowth. The men below moved with experienced hunters' methodical precision, checking every gully and thicket. One carried a deputy's badge that caught sunlight. "Crowther," she whispered. "And those others look like hired gunmen." "They are. Pike's brought in outside talent." Atsadi's voice was thoughtful. "Means he's growing desperate. That works in our favor." "How is desperation good?" "Desperate men make poor decisions, take unnecessary risks." Atsadi watched the search party pass. "They're pushing too hard too fast. Eventually they'll make mistakes we can exploit." They remained hidden until hunters disappeared into the next valley, then mounted for continued journey toward Willow Springs. Atsadi led them higher into mountains, following paths that seemed invisible to untrained eyes, but had been worn by generations of Apache feet. By afternoon, they had worked around to approach town from the north. From a rocky overlook, they could see the settlement spread below, like a child's toy village, false-fronted buildings along a dusty main street, with Pike's mine operation visible in the distance, like a scar on landscape. "Either hum." Atsadi pointed to a white-painted structure near town center. "The schoolhouse. Teacher's name is Abigail Winters. She's helped Apache children learn reading and writing." "You think she'll risk helping us?" "Doc Edwin trusts her completely. That's recommendation enough." They waited for dusk, then began careful descent toward civilization. The plan was straightforward, but dangerous: reach Abigail with their evidence, then remain hidden until the federal land agent arrived. Doc Edwin proved instrumental to their success, or so it seemed. As they approached Willow Springs outskirts, his familiar wagon came rattling up the road from Hugh Mallory's direction. The physician spotted them immediately and pulled over with practiced nonchalance. "Get in the back," he ordered, throwing canvas tarp over them. Crowther has men watching every approach to town. What they couldn't see from under the musty canvas was Doc Edwin's brief stop at Morrison's General Store, where he had a hurried conversation with a man who immediately mounted a horse and rode hard toward Pike's mine. The message was simple. The fugitives were heading for the schoolhouse just as planned. Hidden beneath canvas, Leonora clutched both evidence packets while the wagon bounced over rutted roads. She could hear ordinary conversations as they passed through town people conducting evening business, unaware of drama unfolding around them. The wagon stopped behind the schoolhouse. Doc Edwin's knock followed a specific pattern, 2 short pause, 3 longer. Apparently prearranged because a woman's voice answered immediately from inside. "Edwin, what brings you out so late?" "Have some visitors who need assistance, Abigail." The kind requiring discretion. Abigail Winters proved to be a woman in her 30s, with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing important. She took one look at Leonora's condition and ushered them inside without questions. The schoolhouse consisted of a single large room with student desks arranged in neat rows and educational posters covering walls. The familiar scent of chalk dust and learning hung in air like incense. "There's a hiding place under the floor," Abigail explained, lifting a concealed panel near her desk. "Built during the war to hide runaway slaves. Should serve our purposes now." The space beneath was cramped but functional, carved from earth and reinforced with timber. As they prepared to descend, Leonora pressed both evidence packets into Abigail's capable hands. "If something happens to us, make sure the federal agent gets these. Every document proves Pike has been falsifying territorial records for years." "What about little Irene?" Doc Edwin asked, with what seemed like genuine concern. "Hugh's boy mentioned you had a child with you earlier. We found her being used as bait in an abandoned cabin." Leonora explained, face clouding with memory. "She's safe now, hidden where Pike's men won't think to look." But even as they settled into underground refuge, heavy boots echoed on the schoolhouse porch above. A familiar voice called out with false politeness that fooled no one. "Miss Winters, Sheriff Crowther here. Like to ask some questions about fugitives we're tracking." In their earthen hiding place, Atsadi and Leonora pressed against dirt walls, hardly daring to breathe. Above them, Abigail's calm response carried clearly through floorboards. "Certainly, Sheriff. How may I assist you?" "Looking for an Apache buck and a white woman. Dangerous criminals who've murdered several upstanding citizens. You seen anything suspicious lately?" "Just my usual teaching duties. Although I did notice some riders earlier heading toward the mine. They seemed quite hurried." Crowther's boots creaked as he paced around the room. "Mind if I search, just being thorough?" "Of course not." The systematic search that followed tested every nerve. Desks scraped across floor papers, rustled drawers opened and closed with deliberate noise. Leonora's heart hammered so loudly she was certain Crowther would hear it through wooden planks. Beside her, Atsadi had drawn his knife ready for fight if discovery became inevitable. But Abigail had concealed the entrance expertly. After several tense minutes, Sheriff's footsteps moved toward the door. "Much obliged, Miss Winters. You see anything unusual, contact me immediately. Pike's offering substantial rewards for information." "I'll certainly keep that in mind, Sheriff." The door closed and footsteps faded. They waited another hour before Abigail gave all clear, but when they emerged from the cellar, her expression was grave. "The situation is worse than you know," she reported quietly. "Crowther's posted men throughout town, and I overheard something else. Pike plans to move against your people tomorrow night." "Now what kind of move?" Atsadi demanded, though he suspected he already knew. "Something involving the creek. He wants it to appear accidental, but his goal is destroying your band's gardens and forcing relocation to reservation lands." Blood drained from Atsadi's face. Without those carefully tended plots, his people would face starvation during coming winter. Relocation meant abandoning ancestral lands, accepting defeat at Pike's hands. "We have to warn them," he said, "and abandon our chance to stop Pike legally." Leonora shook her head. "The federal agent arrives tomorrow morning. If we can stay hidden until then, my people will be scattered by tomorrow night." The schoolhouse fell silent as their dilemma's weight settled over them like suffocating blanket. Choose between saving Atsadi's community and pursuing legal justice, knowing either decision carried terrible consequences. Doc Edwin broke the impasse with a suggestion that surprised them all. "Hugh Mallory knows these mountains better than anyone. If we could coordinate with him." "Hugh has already risked enough," Leonora protested. "We can't ask him to endanger his family further." But Atsadi was already moving toward the door, decision made. "Some responsibilities cannot be delegated. Doc, can you get a message to Hugh without Crowther's men intercepting it?" "I can try. What should I tell him?" "Tell him it's time to choose sides. And tell him to gather every man he trusts." As Doc Edwin slipped away into darkness, Leonora caught Atsadi's sleeve. "What are you planning?" His dark eyes reflected lamplight like volcanic glass chips. "Pike wants to destroy my people's future. Perhaps it's time we return the favor." What none of them realized was that Doc Edwin's message to Hugh Mallory would never be delivered. Instead, the doctor rode straight to Pike's mine with detailed information about their hideout, their plans, and their weaknesses. The trap was closing exactly as intended. The pre-dawn hours in the root cellar felt oppressive, earthen walls seeming to contract with each passing minute. Atsadi sat with his back against wooden support posts, methodically cleaning his rifle, while Leonora dozed fitfully beside him. Above, the schoolhouse creaked in morning breeze. Atsadi's hand moved automatically through familiar weapon maintenance rituals, checking action, counting ammunition, testing blade edges. Each tool had served him well over years, but all showed their age. He thought of Shila, who had faced Pike's men with nothing but words and good intentions. His fingers found the dented tin locket in his shirt pocket, recovered from his brother's body after that terrible day. For months he had carried it, without opening it, afraid of what memories might spill out. But this morning, with danger pressing close, something compelled him to snap it open. The tiny photograph inside was badly damaged, water-stained and cracked. But the face remained recognizable, a young woman with gentle eyes and intelligent expression. Atsadi's breath caught as recognition struck like physical blow. It was Leonora. "No." He whispered, hands trembling as he held the locket closer to light, filtering through floorboards. But there could be no mistake. The woman sleeping beside him was identical to the person whose image Shila had carried to his death. The sound woke Leonora. She stirred, wincing as movement pulled at her wounded arm, then noticed the locket in his hands. "Where did you get that?" she asked in a voice barely above whisper. Without speaking, Atsadi handed her the damaged photograph. Her reaction confirmed his worst fears, sharp intake of breath, hands flying to cover her mouth, tears immediately filling her eyes. "I gave this to your brother," she said in a voice shaking with emotion. 3 months before he died. We were friends. Friends. The word tasted bitter in Atsadi's mouth. Apache men and white women don't form friendships in this territory. Not the kind involving photographs. It wasn't romantic, Leonora said quickly, defensively. Your brother came to town sometimes to trade goods, learn about white customs. Most people treated him terribly, cheated him, called him names, acted like he was barely human. But I always tried to be fair, show basic respect. Atsadi weighted his face, an impassive mask, revealing nothing of internal turmoil. He was learning English, trying to understand how white society functioned. Said it might help his people navigate what was coming. Tears flowed freely now. I taught him words, shared stories about eastern cities, about my family. He told me about Apache traditions, about the land, about you. And the photograph. He said he'd never had a white friend before. Asked if I had a picture he could keep something to remember kindness by. She looked at Atsadi with desperate eyes. It was innocent, completely innocent. A symbol of hope that different peoples might coexist peacefully. Then why didn't you mention this before? When I spoke his name, you claimed you only remembered watching him die. You never said you knew him personally. Leonora closed her eyes, as if memory caused physical pain. Because I was there when it happened. Not just observing from distance, I was directly involved. The cellar fell silent, except for breathing, and distant mockingbird beginning morning song, oblivious to human drama unfolding below. Pike had been pressuring me for weeks to sign documents supporting his fraudulent land claims. Leonora continued. False papers that would give his mine legal access to Apache water rights. I kept refusing, so he ordered Crowther and 2 guards to drag me to his office. Atsadi's hand moved unconsciously to his knife hilt. They were forcing me toward a wagon when your brother appeared. Shila wasn't part of any organized protest. He was just in town trading, saw what was happening, and intervened. He grabbed the guard's arm, told them to release me. And they killed him for that. Harry, the one with the hatchet, drew his pistol and shot Shila in the chest. Just like that. No warning, no hesitation. Leonora's voice cracked completely. Your brother died trying to save me from Pike's thugs. Then they forced me to sign a statement claiming he attacked them first. The photograph fluttered to earthen floor as Atsadi's hands clenched into fists. You signed their lies. Crowther put a gun to my head and threatened to kill me too if I didn't. So I signed it, but I destroyed my copy immediately afterward. I've been carrying that guilt ever since. Atsadi stared at her for a long moment, mind reprocessing everything that had happened between them. The woman he had been protecting, the witness, whose testimony could clear his brother's name, they were the same person. The individual Shila had died defending. There's something else, Leonora said quietly. In Ronan's papers, the ones he stole from Pike's safe, there's a payment record. $5 to Harry for eliminating Indian troublemaker. Pike had paid a man $5 to murder Shila. The casual cruelty struck Atsadi like hammer blow to chest. So now you understand, Leonora said. Your brother died because of me. Because I was too weak to stand up to Pike alone, too frightened to refuse his demands. Atsadi picked up the locket, studying the damaged photograph one final time before closing it with soft click. When he looked at Leonora again, his expression had changed subtly. My brother chose to help someone in need, he said finally. He saw injustice and acted according to his conscience. That's exactly the kind of man he was. Atsadi slipped the locket back into his pocket. The guilt belongs to Pike and his hired killers, not to you. But if I had been stronger, if you had been stronger, you'd be dead alongside him, and Pike would still be poisoning the water. Atsadi's voice carried absolute certainty. Shila died protecting what he believed was right. Now we finish what he started. Above them, footsteps crossed the schoolhouse floor, Abigail arriving for another teaching day. Soon children would fill desks overhead, reciting lessons and practicing penmanship, blissfully unaware of life and death drama unfolding beneath their feet. The federal agent arrives in 6 hours, Leonora said. Do we wait for legal justice? Atsadi considered their options carefully. Pike was planning to flood Apache gardens tonight, destroying his people's livelihood and forcing them from ancestral lands. But if they acted precipitously, they might lose their only chance to bring Pike down through legitimate channels. We wait, he decided. But if Agent Laurent doesn't listen, if he proves another official in Pike's pocket, he didn't need to complete the thought. Leonora understood perfectly. They would take justice into their own hands, whatever the personal cost. As morning light grew stronger above them, Atsadi found himself thinking about Shila's final moments. His brother had died trying to save a woman he barely knew, acting purely from conscience and moral conviction. Now it was Atsadi's turn to choose between safety and principle. The decision, when it finally came, would either honor Shila's sacrifice or render it meaningless. But first disaster struck from an unexpected direction. Atsadi had climbed out of the cellar before dawn to reconnoiter the schoolhouse area, moving through pre-dawn darkness like shadow among shadows. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Pike's men had surrounded the building during night hours. At least 12 positions gunmen hidden behind water troughs, wood piles, and nearby building corners. They weren't preparing to attack. They were simply watching and waiting. It was a trap, and they had walked directly into it. Slipping back to the cellar, he found Leonora awake and alert, somehow sensing changed circumstances. "We're surrounded," he reported grimly. "Pike knows exactly where we are." How is that possible? Only Doc Edwin and Abigail knew our location. Above them, the schoolhouse door exploded inward with a crash that sent dust raining through floorboards. Heavy boots stomped across the room, accompanied by Abigail's voice raised in righteous indignation. "Sheriff Crowther, you have no authority to disrupt my classroom. Got reliable information that you're harboring dangerous fugitives, Miss Winters. Credible source says they're hiding right here in your school." In the cellar, Atsadi drew his knife, while motioning for Leonora to retreat to the far corner. If they were discovered, he intended to make their capture as costly as possible for Pike's men. "Search all you want," Abigail replied coolly, "but I expect you to repair any damage you cause." The systematic destruction that followed was clearly intentional. Desks overturned with unnecessary violence, books thrown to floor, papers scattered like fallen leaves. Crowther and his deputies were expressing frustration with the chase by vandalizing symbols of education and progress. "Nothing here, Sheriff," one deputy reported after several minutes of chaos. "Check outside. Storage shed, outhouse, anywhere they might be hiding." Footsteps moved away, but Atsadi knew this was only temporary reprieve. Pike wouldn't abandon the hunt when this close to victory. Sure enough, within minutes, a child's terrified scream pierced morning air. Leonora's face went white as she recognized the voice that had haunted nightmares. "Irene," she whispered. Through floorboards, they could hear Crowther's triumphant announcement. "Well, well. Look what we found hiding under Miss Winters's porch. Little Irene McKenna, the missing girl everyone's been worried about." "Release her immediately," Abigail demanded. "She's just a frightened child. Child or not, she's evidence of your criminal conspiracy. Proves you've been assisting known fugitives." Crowther's voice turned ugly with menace. "Where are they, Miss Winters? Tell me now, or the girl suffers consequences of adult decisions." Atsadi watched Leonora's resolve crumble as Irene's cries grew more desperate. The 8-year-old they had rescued from Pike's men was being used as bait again, and this time there seemed no way to reach her without exposing themselves to certain death. "I don't know what you mean," Abigail replied, but her voice wavered slightly under pressure. The sharp crack of flesh striking flesh echoed through the building. Irene's scream of pain and terror cut through Leonora like blades shattering her self-control. "Stop," she called out before Atsadi could prevent her. "I'm here, don't hurt her anymore." But Atsadi was already moving, grabbing her arm and clamping his free hand over her mouth to muffle further outbursts. "No," he hissed urgently. "It's exactly what they want. The moment we reveal ourselves, we're dead, and Irene remains their prisoner." Above them, Crowther laughed with genuine pleasure. "Thought that might flush them out. Boys tear this place apart board by board. They're here somewhere, and I intend to find them." The renewed search was more violent and systematic. They could hear crowbars being employed, sledgehammers breaking through walls. It was only a matter of time before someone discovered the concealed entrance to their hiding place. "There has to be another exit," Leonora whispered desperately. Atsadi had already been exploring that possibility, running hands along earthen walls, seeking alternatives. His fingers finally found what he sought, a wooden panel that felt different from others, ruder and more weathered. Abigail mentioned this was part of Underground Railroad. He murmured, working his knife around panel edges. They always maintained escape routes for emergencies. The board came free with soft scraping sound, revealing a narrow tunnel disappearing into absolute darkness. It was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, and Hatsadi had no idea where it led. "You first," he instructed. "I'll seal entrance behind us and follow." Even as Leonora squeezed into claustrophobic passage sounds from above grew more urgent. Someone had found something suspicious, possibly the loose floorboard concealing their former sanctuary. "Sheriff," a voice called excitedly. "Found something over here." Hatsadi pushed Leonora forward into tunnel, then followed, pulling wooden panel back into position, just as boots thundered directly overhead. The passage was tight-fit, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through complete darkness, while muffled shouts indicated their former hiding place had been discovered. The tunnels seemed endless, running beneath town foundations, through spaces that hadn't seen light in decades. Leonora's wounded arm made progress difficult, but she gritted teeth and kept moving. Behind her, Hatsadi navigated by touch, one hand maintaining contact with her ankle. Finally, blessed daylight appeared ahead, narrow opening concealed behind pile of old lumber. They emerged behind Morrison's general store, covered in dirt and gasping for breath, like miners escaping cave-in. But their troubles were far from over. As they crept around Building Corner, Doc Edwin's wagon approached at dangerous speed, the physician's face grim with apparent urgency. Pike's men raided Hugh Mallory's ranch an hour ago. He reported without preamble, though there was something in his eyes that didn't quite match his concerned tone. Hugh tried to stop them from taking Ronan, and they shot him down in front of his wife and children. The news struck them like physical blows. Hugh Mallory, the kind farmer who had risked everything to help strangers, was dead because of their fight against corruption. But what about Ronan? Leonora asked, though she dreaded the answer. They took him alive, but barely, and they recovered some of the evidence he was carrying. Doc Edwin's voice was heavy with what seemed like grief and anger. But that's not the worst news. Pike's moving up his timeline. The dam breaks tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight, Hatsadi felt reality spinning around him. But the federal agent, Laurent's stage, was attacked 20 miles outside town. Bandits, supposedly, but we know better. Pike eliminated any federal witness to tonight's operation. Everything was collapsing simultaneously. Their evidence was scattered or destroyed, their allies were dead or captured, and Pike was preparing to flood Apache gardens under cover of darkness. In mere hours, Hatsadi's people would lose everything they had spent generations building. "There's one more development," Doc Edwin continued quietly, and now there was definitely something off about his manner, a slight eagerness beneath the supposed sorrow. "Pike's offered to exchange Irene and Ronan for you two. Direct trade, no deception. But it has to happen before sunset at Echo Canyon." Leonora met Hatsadi's eyes, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their dark depths. Pike was presenting them with impossible choice: save themselves, while innocent people died or sacrificed themselves to protect a child and wounded man. It wasn't really choice at all. "Now where in Echo Canyon?" Hatsadi asked. "Where he built his dam, where he plans to stage tonight's accident." Doc Edwin's voice dropped even lower, but there was something calculating in his expression that neither of them noticed in their distress. "But understand, this is trap. Pike has no intention of letting any of you survive the night." "We know," Leonora said simply, "but we're going anyway." As Doc Edwin drove away, supposedly to alert their few remaining allies, Hatsadi and Leonora prepared for what they both understood would be their final confrontation. What they couldn't know was that Doc Edwin was heading straight to Pike with detailed information about their condition, their weapons, and their determination to reach the dam before sunset. The trap was closing exactly as planned. Echo Canyon carved through mountains like ancient wound, its walls rising nearly 300 feet on either side in layered bands of red and gold stone. At the canyon's narrowest point, Conrad Pike had constructed his engineering marvel, a massive timber and stone dam designed to regulate spring snowmelt for his mining operation. Tonight, that same structure would serve different purpose. Pike had packed it with enough dynamite to obliterate the barrier and send millions of gallons of water roaring down toward Apache settlements below. Come morning, he would claim tragic engineering failure, unavoidable accident that nobody could have prevented. But as Atsadi and Leonora approached from the north rim following treacherous game trail that switched back down canyon face, they were walking into more than just Pike's trap. They were about to discover the full extent of betrayal that had guided their every step. The sound of rushing water filled air, along with voices of men working to complete Pike's murderous scheme. Lanterns flickered around dam's control structure like malevolent fireflies. There, Atsadi pointed through gathering dusk to where lights clustered around main building. That's where they're holding Irene and Ronan. Leonora counted guards Pike had stationed around installation. At least 15 men, all heavily armed and positioned to control every approach. Reaching their friends would require nothing short of miracle. "Look," she whispered, grabbing Atsadi's arm. Familiar figure emerged from control house, dragging small form that fought every step, despite obvious exhaustion. Even at this distance, they could see Irene's courage remained unbroken after everything endured. "And there's Ronan," Atsadi observed grimly. Wounded miner sat tied to chair outside main building, his head hanging forward in pain or unconsciousness. Medical treatment had kept him alive, but he clearly needed more care than he was receiving. "Pike's keeping his word so far," Leonora noted. "Both hostages are breathing. For now." Atsadi checked his weapons one final time. "But the moment we show ourselves, we'll be walking into slaughter," she finished. "I understand, but we can't abandon them." As if responding to their conversation, Conrad Pike himself appeared on Dam's wooden walkway. Even from distance, his voice carried clearly in Canyon's natural acoustics. "Atsadi, Miss Ward, I know you're watching." Pike's shout echoed off stone walls. "Time grows short. Present yourselves, or the child pays for adult stubbornness." To emphasize his threat, Pike nodded toward Crowther, who immediately backhanded Irene across face. 8-year-old's cry of pain and fear cut through Leonora like sword blade. "Enough," she called back, rising from concealment despite Atsadi's restraining hand. "We're here." Leonora no, but she was already moving, scrambling down rocky slope toward canyon floor, with Atsadi reluctantly following. They had committed themselves now. There could be no retreat. Pike watched their approach with obvious satisfaction, flanked by surviving gunmen and corrupt officials. In lantern light, his face resembled something carved from malevolent stone, all sharp angles and cruel shadows. "The famous Apache warrior and his eastern accomplice," he said mockingly as they reached Dam's base. "You've caused me considerable expense and inconvenience." "Release them," Atsadi said simply. "You have what you wanted." "Do I?" Pike's laughter was harsh as grinding millstones. "You've cost me valuable men, damaged my reputation, turned half the territory against my legitimate business interests. Did you really believe I'd simply let you walk away?" Crowther and 3 other gunmen had moved to flank them, cutting off any possibility of escape. More armed men appeared on walkways above rifles trained down on small group gathered in Dam's shadow. "Our agreement was exchange," Leonora said, fighting to keep voice steady. "We're here. Now honor your word and release Irene and Ronan." My word," Pike replied with mock solemnity, "is whatever I choose it to be. And I choose to see all of you dead before I trigger tonight's tragic accident." He gestured toward Control House, where warm lantern light revealed bundles of dynamite wired to central detonator. But there was something else, a mechanical device ticking steadily beside the explosives. A timer counting down to automated detonation. "You see, I've learned something important during my years in this territory. Pike continued conversationally. Fear only maintains control if people believe you'll follow through on threats. Tonight, when that dam fails and floods Apache lands, everyone will understand that opposing Conrad Pike carries fatal consequences. The territorial government will investigate, Leonora said desperately. Federal officials won't ignore mass murder. What officials? Pike's smile was genuinely amused. Poor Agent Laurent encountered bandits on the road. Terrible thing, these random Apache raids. The casual admission of murder hung in air like poison gas. Pike had systematically eliminated every legal obstacle to his plan, and now he was preparing to dispose of witnesses as well. But then came revelation that changed everything. You made one crucial error, Pike. New voice called from shadows near Control House. Everyone turned as Doc Edwin stepped into lantern light, but something was wrong with the scene. Physician wasn't arriving as their rescuer. He was emerging from Pike's stronghold, and his medical bag was conspicuously absent. In its place, he carried expensive leather satchel that gleamed with gold fittings. And what mistake was that? Pike asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. You assumed these people came here alone. Doc Edwin's voice carried odd quality that Atsadi couldn't immediately identify. You never considered they might have inside information about your operations. Understanding hit Leonora like lightning strike. You, she whispered. You've been working for Pike all along, not working for him. Doc Edwin corrected mildly, opening his satchel to reveal not medical instruments, but neat stacks of currency and official documents. Working with him. There's important distinction. Pike's laughter filled Canyon as pieces fell into place. Meet my business partner, Dr. Edwin Hartwell. Did you really think I could maintain my operation without medical expertise? Someone had to treat workers injured in my mine's document, natural causes, when contamination claimed lives. The children who died. Atsadi said, his voice deadly quiet. You signed their death certificates. Tragic victims of childhood diseases. Doc Edwin replied with professional detachment. Quite common in frontier territories with limited medical resources. But you helped us. Leonora protested, her world tilting off axis. You treated our wounds, guided us to safety. I guided you exactly where Pike needed you to be. Did you think it coincidence that Hugh Mallory was so perfectly positioned to help? That Abigail's school had such convenient hiding places? Doc Edwin's smile was cold as winter starlight. Every step of your journey was orchestrated to lead you here. Now the small details made terrible sense. His two specific questions about their plans and the expensive pocket watch, his uncanny ability to anticipate their needs and provide exactly the right assistance at crucial moments. Hugh Mallory. Atsadi said, pieces clicking into place. Did he know? Hugh was exactly what he appeared, good man trying to do right, which made him perfect for our purposes. Doc Edwin's tone suggested discussing weather. His death was regrettable but necessary. Can't have loose ends when territorial government investigates tonight's tragedy. You cold-blooded monster. Leonora snarled, taking step toward treacherous physician before Crowther's rifle stopped her. I'm practical man who recognized opportunity when it presented itself. Doc Edwin corrected. Pike needed someone with medical credentials to legitimize his operation. I needed financial security for my retirement years. Simple business arrangement that's made us both very wealthy. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Man they had trusted, who had seemed to represent decency in corrupt territory, had been manipulating them from beginning. But even as scope of their betrayal became clear, Atsadi noticed something that gave him hope. Movement on canyon rim above continued, which meant someone up there didn't know about Doc Edwin's treachery. Tommy Mallory Hughes' boy had apparently made it to alert the neighboring ranchers as planned. "You still made one mistake," Atsadi said, his voice carrying clearly in night air. "Enlighten me," Pike replied with amusement. "You assumed all our allies were as corrupt as you?" First rifle shot cracked from canyon rim like thunderclap, taking out one of Pike's sentries in spray of blood and sparks. Suddenly, night erupted in gunfire as unknown marksmen opened up on Pike's forces from multiple positions above. What in blazes? Pike spun toward sound, his confidence evaporating as muzzle flashes strobed along canyon rim. "Take cover," Crowther bellowed, but his carefully positioned guards were caught completely unprepared. Men who had expected to execute helpless prisoners found themselves under accurate fire from elevated positions. But the gunfight was only beginning of their problems. In control house, mechanical timer continued its relentless countdown toward automated detonation. Pike had planned for every contingency, including his own potential death if anything went wrong. Dam would still be destroyed. In chaos, Atsadi tackled Sheriff Crowther before corrupt lawmen could bring rifle to bear. They rolled in dirt beside Dam, fighting for control of weapon, while bullets whined overhead like angry hornets. Leonora sprinted toward Irene, dodging panicked gunmen as they tried to return fire at invisible attackers. She reached terrified Child just as one of Pike's hired killers swung his rifle toward them both. "No, don't move," gunmen shouted, but his attention was divided between females below and shooters above. That moment of indecision cost him his life as bullet from canyon rim found its mark. "Are you hurt?" Leonora asked urgently as she untied Irene's bonds with trembling fingers. Miss Leonora, little girl, threw arms around her rescuer's neck. "I knew you'd come back. I never stopped believing." But their reunion was interrupted as Pike himself appeared, face twisted with rage and smoking pistol in hand. Behind him, Doc Edwin was retreating toward control house, apparently having no stomach for actual combat. "Enough of this chaos," Pike roared. "I'll kill every one of you myself." Atsadi looked up from his struggle with Crowther to see Pike taking deliberate aim at Leonora and Irene. Time dilated as he made his choice, releasing grip on Sheriff's weapon to throw himself between Pike and intended victims. Bullet took Atsadi in shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him against Dam's wooden framework. Pike's second shot splintered timber inches from his head as he rolled desperately aside, leaving trail of blood on planking. "You want to die protecting them," Pike snarled, advancing with deadly intent. "I'll gladly accommodate your noble gesture." But before Pike could fire again, new complication arose. In control, house mechanical timer had reached critical point, less than 10 minutes until detonation. Even if they won, firefight Dam would still be destroyed unless someone could stop automated sequence. "The timer," Leonora shouted, pointing toward ticking device. "Someone has to stop it." Atsadi struggled to his feet, despite wounded shoulder, assessing situation rapidly. Pike stood between them and control house, still armed and dangerous. Doc Edwin had barricaded himself inside with explosives and timer. And above them, gunfight continued as Hugh Mallory's neighbors fought Pike's remaining men. "Cover me," Atsadi commanded, sprinting toward control house despite his injuries. Leonora grabbed fallen rifle and began shooting at remaining gunmen who tried to stop him. Her marksmanship was poor but enthusiastic, forcing them to seek cover, while Atsadi reached building. But Doc Edwin had locked door from inside and was shouting threats about triggering immediate detonation if anyone tried to enter. Mechanical timer showed 8 minutes remaining, not enough time for subtle approach. "The spillway," Leonora shouted suddenly, pointing toward Canyon's eastern wall, where she had noticed secondary channel carved into rock. "If we can open emergency spillway, water will drain away from Apache lands, even if dam breaks." Atsadi followed her gesture to where heavy wooden gates currently blocked spillway Pike had built as insurance against spring floods. If those gates could be opened, millions of gallons would find new path toward distant desert rather than Apache settlements. Keep them busy, he called back, changing direction toward spillway controls. But Pike had realized their plan and was moving to intercept, firing rapidly as he pursued. One bullet grazed Atsadi's wounded shoulder, nearly spinning him off balance. But he kept running. Spillway mechanism was located on narrow walkway spanning chasm, where water thundered past at tremendous velocity. One wrong step would mean certain death in crushing torrent below. And Pike was closing fast, reloading as he came. Atsadi reached controls just as Pike appeared on walkway behind him, pistol raised for killing shot. But before he could fire, unexpected intervention came from wounded Ronan, who had somehow freed himself and tackled Pike from behind. "For Hugh Mallory," Ronan shouted as both men grappled near walkway edge. Atsadi threw full weight against spillway wheel, feeling something tear in wounded shoulder as he fought to turn stubborn mechanism. Slowly, agonizingly, gates began opening. Water started trickling through gap, then flowing more rapidly as hydraulic pressure took hold. Pike broke free from Ronan's weakened grasp and raised pistol again, but Atsadi was ready. His knife flew through night air in perfect arc, taking Pike's center mass and driving him backward against walkway railing. Mine owner looked down at bone handle protruding from his chest, then back at Atsadi with something resembling surprise. You actually..." Pike collapsed, blood pooling on wooden planks as his life ebbed away. But even with their primary enemy dead, mechanical timer in control, House continued its relentless countdown. 6 minutes remaining. Doc Edwin. Leonora called toward barricaded building. "It's over. Pike is dead. Stop the timer and surrender." "Never," came muffled reply. "Better to die rich than live poor. Timer can't be stopped anyway." Pike made sure of that. 5 minutes. Atsadi examined spillway gates now fully open and draining reservoir rapidly. Water level behind dam was dropping, but not fast enough to prevent significant flooding when explosion occurred. 4 minutes. The dynamite charges. Ronan called weakly from where he lay bleeding on walkway. "Pike showed me earlier they're all wired to single detonator. If you can cut main wire." 3 minutes. Atsadi sprinted back toward control house, but Doc Edwin had barricaded doors solidly. Breaking through would take time they didn't have. He could hear physician inside, apparently destroying evidence and preparing for end. 2 minutes. Leonora appeared beside him with small hatchet she had found among construction tools. "The window," she said. "It's our only chance." They smashed glass and climbed through just as timer showed 90 seconds remaining. Doc Edwin cowered in corner, clutching his satchel of money while mechanical device ticked toward 0. 60 seconds. Atsadi traced wiring from timer to main bundle, leading to dynamite charges throughout dam structure. Multiple connections, but one primary cable carried detonation signal to all explosives. 30 seconds. "Stop!" Doc Edwin screamed. "You'll ruin everything." Leonora swung hatchet with desperate strength, severing main detonation cable just as timer reached 0. Mechanical device clicked, once then fell silent. 15 seconds that might have been. 10. 5. Nothing happened. Explosive charges remained inert throughout dam structure, their connection to trigger mechanism severed at final moment. Outside gunfire was winding down as Pike's demoralized forces either fled or surrendered to canyon rim shooters. Crisis was over, but at terrible cost. Pike was dead, his criminal organization shattered, but good people had died to achieve victory. Hugh Mallory shot down defending his principles. Doc Edwin's betrayal had cost them dearly in trust and blood. As dawn broke over Echo Canyon, revealing full extent of previous night's destruction and triumph, survivors began assessing what they had won and lost. Dam remained intact, saving Apache Gardens. Creek ran free through open spillway, no longer imprisoned behind artificial barrier. Doc Edwin sat with hands bound, awaiting transport to territorial prison. His medical bag lay beside him, finally revealing true contents, not healing instruments, but tools of deception, forged death certificates, false medical reports, and correspondence with corrupt officials throughout Southwest. 23 years practicing medicine. He said to no one in particular as dawn light illuminated haggard features. I actually helped people once before. I discovered how profitable it was to look the other way. Justice had been served, but questions remained about how long it would last in territory where corruption ran deep and money talked louder than principles. Only time would tell if their sacrifice had purchased lasting change or merely temporary respite from systemic problems. But for now, it was enough that children like Irene would inherit a world where friendship across cultural boundaries was possible, where different peoples could work together toward common goals. That was Shila's true legacy, not manner of his death, but life his sacrifice had made possible for others. 3 weeks after Echo Canyon Willow Springs had begun settling into new rhythms. Pike's mine remained closed while federal investigators sorted through evidence of corruption. But legitimate mining operations were being planned under proper territorial oversight. Creek ran clear and sweet, supporting both Apache gardens and white farmers' crops in unprecedented abundance. Leonora stood at window of Abigail's rebuilt schoolhouse, watching children play during afternoon recess. Irene was among them, her laughter bright as she chased classmates in elaborate games. Resilience of youth continued to amaze every adult who witnessed it. Territorial Education Supervisor approved funding for evening classes. Abigail reported joining her at window. Reading and writing instruction for adults who never had opportunity. Both Apache and white students together. Integration rather than separation, Leonora mused. Revolutionary concept for this territory. Times are changing. What you and Atsadi accomplished here opened people's minds to possibilities they'd never considered before. That afternoon's mail stage brought correspondence letter addressed to Leonora from Territorial Capital in Prescott. She opened it with curious fingers, then gasped at contents. Deputy Marshal Williams writes that they've arrested 24 territorial officials on corruption charges based on Pike's records. She reported with growing excitement, including former Attorney General and 3 federal land commissioners. And Congress is considering new legislation to protect Indian water rights throughout Southwest. Shila's death accomplished something meaningful, after all, Abigail observed quietly. That evening, Leonora walked to Willow Creek, following path that had become routine over recent weeks. Water sang over smooth stones, carrying clean scent of mountain snow and summer rain. Here she came to remember plan and process remarkable changes in her life. Atsadi waited beneath cottonwood, where they had first taken shelter. He had been meeting regularly with white ranchers to establish fair irrigation agreements using Apache water management knowledge to benefit entire valley. Williams wrote about arrests. He said without preamble, "Justice moves slowly, but it does move." Leonora settled beside him on grassy bank. Your people's water rights are being formally recognized by territorial law. No more illegal diversions, no more deliberate contamination. They sat in companionable silence, watching evening light dance on water that nourished both Apache corn and white farmers' wheat. In distance, smoke rose from cooking fires in both communities, 2 cultures learning to share same valley in unprecedented cooperation. There's something you should see, Atsadi said, eventually producing folded document with territorial seals and legal language covering its surface. Leonora examined it in fading light eyes, widening as she read. This is property deed for Hugh Mallory's farm. Community members organized fund to purchase it after Sarah couldn't manage alone. Keep it from falling into corporate hands. Atsadi's voice remained carefully neutral. Apache families, white ranchers, townspeople all contributed. Even Ronan sent money from his hospital bed. But deed isn't in anyone's individual name, Leonora observed with growing amazement. It's held in trust for community benefit. Abigail's suggestion said Hugh would have wanted land used for common good, not private profit. Atsadi gestured toward creek. Farm controls water access for half the valley. This arrangement ensures everyone has voice in management. And who oversees this trust? Atsadi's smile was barely visible in twilight. Read final paragraph. Leonora squinted at small print, then looked at him with amazement. It names you and me as joint trustees, along with Abigail. Community believes we work well together. Implications were staggering. As trustees, they would be responsible for managing irrigation rights, resolving water disputes, and ensuring equitable access for all valley residents. It was exactly the kind of practical cooperation that could serve as model for other communities facing similar challenges. This could change everything, Leonora said. Not just locally, but across entire territory. Maybe. Or maybe it's just a small step toward world Shila believed was possible. As if summoned by mention of his brother's name, Atsadi pulled out dented tin locket one final time. In gathering darkness, he opened it carefully and removed water-stained photograph that had traveled so far from its origins. I've been carrying this for over a year, he said quietly. Time to let it rest. He placed photograph on flat stone beside creek, then weighted it down with piece of Apache turquoise blue as summer sky traditional symbol of protection and healing. Shila died believing in friendship across cultural boundaries, Atsadi said. Maybe best way to honor that belief is by building something lasting. Leonora understood completely. This wasn't just about water rights or community cooperation. It was about proving different peoples could work together for common benefit. That future didn't have to repeat past mistakes. Evening classes start next week, she reported. Abigail thinks we'll have 40 students first night Apache and white adults learning side by side. And irrigation committee meets every Thursday to resolve disputes before they become feuds. Small steps, Leonora agreed. But steps in right direction. As full darkness settled over valley, they could see lights beginning to twinkle in windows throughout both communities. Apache fires and white lanterns, all drawing sustenance from same clean water, same fertile soil, same endless sky that had witnessed both conflict and reconciliation. They walked back toward town together, two unlikely partners bound by shared struggle and common purpose. Behind them, creek sang its ancient song of renewal and hope, carrying their promises downstream toward whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. In his final report to Territorial Governor Deputy Marshal Williams would write, "Events in Willow Springs demonstrate that cooperation between diverse communities is not only possible, but essential for territory's future development. I strongly recommend that Willow Creek Water Trust be used as template for similar agreements throughout Southwest." But that recognition lay in future. For now it was enough that two people who had found each other in darkest circumstances had chosen to build something better, from ruins of old system. Creek would continue flowing gardens, would continue flourishing, and children like Irene would inherit world where friendship across cultural boundaries was not just possible, but normal. Turquoise stone glinted in starlight beside flowing water, permanent marker of promises kept and hope fulfilled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in this peaceful valley, future looked brighter than it had in years. That was Shila's true legacy, not manner of his death, but life his sacrifice had made possible for others. In territory where justice had always been scarce and expensive, they had managed to create small corner where fairness prevailed, and different peoples could work together toward common goals.